Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Climate EDU. I am your host, Kayla Hathaway, and once again, I am joined by our lovely recurring guest, Jordan Jones. She is a PhD candidate at Colorado State University studying atmospheric science and is currently in her last year of her PhD. And she is joining us again today to go and discuss the recent 2 week Atlantic hurricane season forecast report, which covers the dates of September 16th to September 29th. Jordan, thank you so much for coming back on Simpatico. It's a pleasure to have you again.
It's a pleasure to always be talking with you, Kayla. It's always fun.
Well, I'm glad you think so. So we'll just go ahead and jump right on into it. The Atlantic, metaphorically speaking, it seems like it's on fire.
Because it is. Yes.
Mm.
When you have, in one instance, about five to seven storms within the region, then you know it's definitely on fire, so to speak. It just goes to show that you never underestimate the peak of hurricane season.
Mhm. And so with the peak of hurricane season, in the last episode you mentioned like the wow, I can't pronounce the full name. So the oscillation.
The Madden-Julian
The
oscillation.
Madden-Julian oscillation and
Okay,
how
great.
it'd be reaching it's also kind of in its peak for this area.
Right.
And so it sounds like that's definitely playing a part here.
Yeah, definitely. So just like a quick refresher, just in case there's anyone who's new listening. So the Madden-Julian oscillation is this subseasonal oscillation, right? It means that it varies from about like 60 days to like about 90 or 80 days. So it goes really rapidly, right? And it's really just this kind of locomotive engine of convection and zonal winds or wind speeds that march from the east to the west, right? Or actually, let's switch that around, west to the east. So, in a sense, it's Asia, the maritime continent, into Indonesia, India, and it's moving across the Pacific towards the Atlantic. So what happens is that you have these intermittent periods of dry and wet, dry and wet, dry and wet. And those are the phases that you'll hear people talking about. Phases one, phase two, phase three, phase four, all the way up to phase eight, when it sort of makes a full circle and comes right back over to India and the maritime continent. So we are currently in phase four of the Madden-Julian oscillation, which is essentially still an active Madden-Julian oscillation, which means that we have a favorable environment for hurricane activity. We're in phase four. It's not as favorable anymore. We're already out of phases two and three. The Madden Julian isn't gonna, be ramping up more storms anytime soon. But there's also still a lot of environmental favorability. There's still really warm sea surface temperatures. There is, I think, more vertical wind shear, which means there's more opposition to the development of storms, but none that is impeding any of the storms that are currently within the North Atlantic.
Has there been, because I think we mentioned in an episode before, like the effect of the Sahara, like the dust,
Mhm.
has there been any more dust that could be trying to hinder this, or are we kind of at a point where the Atlantic's just
Yeah, that the Atlantic threw its hands up in the air.
it's like,
No,
let's
there
go.
so no, there isn't any more dust. I mean, Saharan dust generally blows over the Atlantic, especially when there's really strong easterly winds, which means that the winds move from Africa to Mexico in the direction of Mexico. So that happens pretty more often than not. It's whether or not there's this really huge um, dust event that carries a lot of dust over, like we saw in April, but we haven't seen anything of that magnitude at all during this year. It's the Atlantic has just, like you said, thrown up its hands and it's just producing storms. And it's just this wonderful blob of convection that's coming off of Africa and blowing up into more storms.
The Atlantic decided social distancing it's over and they wanted just to go and throw a party.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Mhm. Um, so we had what was it? It was Hurricane Sally
Mhm.
made landfall. What was that? Yesterday?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. Early, uh, that's Central Time. So 1 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday.
Oh geez, I can only imagine like getting a cyclone in the middle of the night. Like it's already scary during the day, but
Right.
then like at nighttime you're like, oh, the wind is screaming.
Yeah, yeah, that would definitely be well, it's harder at night, right?
Mhm.
Trying to evacuate everyone at dark. But yeah, that's probably why we we try our best to inform people before that so they know either to get out or to just hunker down and wait the storm out.
Mhm. And with Sally, like I didn't get the chance to kind of follow that one too closely because I was like
Mhm.
paying attention to like just the fun shenanigans between what was it? I think it's Terry and or whatever the T storm is right now. That's a category four.
Yeah.
Like the T's
So
whatever.
Teddy and Vicky, yeah.
Teddy and Vicky. I was like watching those on. I'm like, oh, and then Sally just suddenly is like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm here. So like what like kind of happened with that storm?
She moved incredibly slow. So she was moving at about 2 miles per hour, which I'm being told is a snail's pace. You
Yeah.
can walk faster than that, apparently. So yeah, Sally was over the so I've been told before that I tend to personalize storms. I apologize for now. This is why you probably shouldn't name them. So yeah, so Sally was essentially at a snail's pace and she was moving over really warm Gulf waters. So she had a lot of time to, get her act together to take advantage of just being over a really warm heat source.
Mhm.
And also she just there wasn't as much shear around her within her environment. So she developed a pretty strong core, turned into a hurricane, and then made landfall.
Yikes. So
Yeah.
with when a storm moves that slow, it sounds like it could be a bit more detrimental because it's just kind of hovering over
Yes.
the same place.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And that's usually because I think the understanding is that when a storm is moving that slowly over warm water, um, it's more efficient, I think, or at least it has more time to convert some of that energy
Mhm.
into dynamical energy and also to just produce more rain,
Mhm.
right? So it just has way more body of water that it can just rain, which is what it did when it made landfall.
Sally's like, I'm gonna make it rain.
Yeah, yeah. And a similar thing happened with Laura as well, where she was just over water for um, a longer period of time.
Mhm. I have a question from Lisa. Also,
Sure.
Ken's introductory comment was, "Hi Jordan, sorry there's no weather events to talk about this week."
I think that's a good thing in my case.
Yeah,
If there are no hurricanes, we can all, just sit down and just enjoy this conversation.
yeah, just like mellow out and be like, "All
Yeah.
right, no big deal, it's fine." um, but our question from Lisa, so she's asking, what causes storms to move at different paces, and why is it significant that Sally was moving so slowly?
That is a good question. That is a very good question. Um, Long story short, I don't know. So there are a lot of different factors that I think can go into that. And that depends a lot on one, what's happening within the environment. There's something called steering winds that we tend to follow with storms. Yeah. So it's kind of like having winds streamline storms within a different direction. Um,
Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm going to go into an analogy here and I hope it works.
Okay.
Uh, so vertical wind shear is kind of like when you have a lot of resistance to storms. It's like if you were standing in the ocean waist deep and you were trying to walk through it. And that resistance that you feel from the ocean is a bit like what a hurricane would feel when moving through vertical wind shear. So you can sort of think of vertical wind shear like that, like a wall of wind that it can't go through, while keeping its structure.
Mhm.
So if there is vertical wind shear on one side, it will try to glean across that wall and it will move along a certain path. And that is what we call the steering winds. So that is one thing. Sometimes there's just something in the way, like vertical wind shear. Sometimes it's like an upper level ridge, which is similar. It just opposes motion. So the vertical, so the hurricane tries to either move around it,
Mhm.
or it just slows down, and that can happen. And sometimes maybe it's just a really huge storm and it just wants to go slowly. I don't know.
Mm.
That is something I think we haven't really figured out just yet. I mean, it's what we call the translational speed, and it's
Mm.
different from the maximum sustained winds, which is all the wind swirling in the eye,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So it can be just a small storm or a larger storm that's taking its time. Yeah, or it's being imposed by the environment.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it kind of sounds like, as you mentioned earlier, like we probably shouldn't name them because then they just take on personalities.
Yeah, it makes it sound as if they're doing this all by themselves. They're
Yeah.
not.
Like it's like, oh, Laura just decided to go and be
Yeah.
rude today. Like, and Sally's here, like, you know what? I'm moving slow. I'm just gonna go and cry all over Florida. um, so, getting on to, so we have a category four currently. I think it hasn't made any landfall yet, right? It's still currently sitting out in the Atlantic.
Right, right.
So what information can we or news info can we expect for this spooky looking storm?
Okay, so wow. Yep, so that hurricane, which is I think now Hurricane Teddy, is making its way towards the eastern coast of the US. That is a ways away, probably more than 2 days away. But I think it'll depend a lot on what the environment will has in store for Teddy, right? For one, as a storm moves further north, it's going to encounter way more of that environmental resistance that we're talking about. When it moves further north, it's also moving away from warmer water, right? Because the further north you go, the colder it gets. Um, so I think if Teddy actually survives that environment, then it'll definitely be, it can be pretty bad, right? There was Hurricane Sandy, yes, in 2012, that, pretty much kept its structure, and then made landfall as a pretty intense storm, near, near New York. So Hurricane Teddy can definitely do the same thing. The possibility is there. A lot of the hurricane models are showing it actually surviving that long to get to the U.S. East Coast. And if it's definitely intense enough, definitely mature enough, it can do that. But apart from Teddy, there's also tropical depression, and let me get that correct. Tropical depression 22, right? Because we are at 22 right now.
Oh no.
22 depressions currently for this season, and that might impact, I think, the most southern tip of Texas and Mexico. So, yeah.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
And then we also, is it tropical storm Vicky or hurricane Vicky now?
Oh, I actually think Vicky is now remnant. Yeah. So it's not a threat, it seems. Vicky is expected to die off. So it's a depression now, and it'll very likely die off by in the afternoon on Friday.
Nice.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so she decided to leave the party, it seems like.
Yeah, Vicky was tired.
She's like, you got it, Teddy. oh, Fahim is asking, why are there more hurricanes in the northern hemisphere?
Oh, that's a good question. Hmm. In the North Atlantic. Hmm. That's a pretty good question. I'm not really sure why. Yeah.
They
Yeah,
just
I don't
decided to
know why.
party there.
Yeah, probably. I mean, because there are storms around and in the region of Australia,
Mhm.
they do tend to get storms quite a bit. But it is not common in the Eastern Pacific or in the North Atlantic, South Atlantic, sorry. So yeah, it's not really sure why that is in particular. I'm not sure if it's because the South Atlantic may be um, just probably a little bit more hostile. It's more water. Yeah, I
Probably colder. I wonder if maybe getting like just cooler. Well, so this is like, please correct me if I'm totally wrong. This is just my hobbyist guesses, and I have have like zero like college experience in atmospheric science. But I'm wondering if maybe the fact of maybe like cooler air or water just being more south due to Antarctica could
Mm,
maybe hinder that, or
hmm. I don't think that is particularly the reason because we have something similar in the North Atlantic as well.
hmm,
Uh, there could definitely be a stronger temperature gradient that might hinder storms moving further and further poleward. That's the word.
poleward.
We can't really say north because it's further south. But yeah, yeah, I think that's one thing. But there could also be that vertical wind shear is climatologically or in the mean zonal wind is just higher in those regions. So hurricanes tend to form where there is the most favorable environment. So yeah, that's probably why, or one of the factors why it's just a more hostile environment for hurricanes. So they never tend to form that far south unless they're around Australia or the maritime continent.
And there was there's kind of like a cyclone near Italy right
A
now.
Medicaine, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the first time I've heard that term. Could you like tell us about like Medicanes and what like
Yeah. So they're just short for Mediterranean hurricanes. That's unfortunately only how much I know about Medicanes, that they have a really cool name and they sound like hurricanes that were born in a medical facility. But but yeah, Mediterranean hurricanes are pretty common. You know, they do form. Um, this one is particularly interesting. It is forecast to actually become subtropical, but then become tropical again before dying, which is pretty wild. So, a subtropical storm or an extratropical storm is essentially a hurricane, but with a cold core, right? Tropical cyclones and hurricanes, as you know it, have warm cores. So they're warm all the way up until the very top. But it's the reverse whenever they move further north. They become cold core because the oceans, well, the environment itself becomes way more hostile. So they adapt or change their mechanisms in order to support themselves and their structure as they move into to more to colder regions. Yeah.
Could it snow cold core?
Oh, possibly, because that's kind of what happened in Sandy, right?
Mhm.
Sandy was like a superstorm. It was
Yeah.
all rain. Yeah.
Hmm. Curious. It's like, with the warm cores, it's like, oh, rain, rain, rain. But I'm here like, mm, I'm gonna have to go on like a Google rabbit hole on this now. Be like cases of like hurricane, but snow. um, yeah, so that was an interesting thing I'd noticed. And then I don't think there's any typhoons that are doing anything right now.
Yeah, I think there is. Um,
Ooh. I know South Korea's been getting
yeah,
hit
they've
pretty bad.
they've been having an interesting season. Oh, okay. It's now Tropical Storm Newell.
Newell.
Noel? Oh, that's interesting. I like the Pacific because they always have the most interesting names
Mhm.
for their typhoons. Yeah. So yeah, there is a system out there, but it's also been pretty dead for the Western Pacific though. They're used to having way more storms, I think. So
That's good.
yeah.
Yeah, like I just what was it? It was Bobby and Haishin and it was like three storms that like just
Mhm.
decided to go and be like, "Hey, Korean Peninsula,
Yes.
you're looking pretty tasty." Um, dang. Well, so kind of to summarize, what should we expect for the next 2 weeks, and
Mhm.
any advice for those that are kind of already in a area that was hit by a cyclone, like that, how
Mhm.
they should just kind of be preparing for the rest of the, what, like 6 weeks or so left of the season?
Mhm. Right, right. We technically still have 2 months, oh, 2.5, I suppose, because we're in mid-September, of hurricane activity. One of the things that I think has been pretty clear for this season is that it has some really strong parallels to 2005, which was our most intense, most active season we've ever had, at least in the since I think 1966 or thereabout. Um, so I think we should definitely expect abnormal or above normal activity for the next 2 weeks. We still have Teddy out there, and we still have Tropical Depression 22, and we also have, I think, another invest that's just behind Teddy. And we're not exactly sure, I think, how that will develop, but it's like 50% chance that it will develop within the next 2 to 5 days. So I think one of the things that we have to bear in mind is that, one, we are in a pretty active season. And I think it's an active season that could very well go into the Greek alphabet, and could extend into December, right? There's always that possibility. It happened with 2005. It can definitely happen now, depending on what the environment, how the environment evolves. I think for regions that have already been impacted by storms, God forbid they're not impacted again by another storm this season. But I think places like Louisiana became pretty close to that because Sally made landfall just short of hitting.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
spooky seeing
that was
that.
a close
Like,
call,
mhm.
because they would have been at their limit already, I think. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen. But it is still a pretty warm North Atlantic. We can still see some activity. And even though these storms have been fairly short-lived, I think it's still a very good idea to remain prepared, remain informed, listen to local experts, local agencies, particularly emergency management agencies, they're definitely going to have the information about how best to handle recurring recurring disasters, right? Because we're still not out of the pandemic just yet.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, as always, Jordan, it is a pleasure to have you on, and I'm looking forward to you coming on for the other reports. I think we have two left.
Yeah, we do still have two bi-weekly forecasts left. Yes.
Right. Well, here's hoping that this again the tug of war of here's hoping that the next report is more mellow.
Yeah.
Like after this one. All right, I'll go ahead and roll us into just chatting, and yeah, we'll be right back.
Okay.